Unit 4, the earthly realm. God creates physical matter and laws. So we left last unit basically with the question, trying to find out why was there a rebellion amongst the angels against God. And so in this unit, we're going to look at the earthly realm, right? And how that connects to answering the question of why there was a rebellion. So if we go back to Genesis 1:1, right? We left off here, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens, and we know that it says he created the heavens and the earth. That's Genesis 1:1. So here, as we're going to begin to kind of look at the creation of the physical universe, right? The earth and everything physical that has to go along with that, things like time and matter and energy. God created all of that, right? And so how does that play into the rebellion of the angels? Well, if you look at the book of Job, in Job 38, Job has an interesting discussion with God. Now, in the book of Job actually is interesting because at the beginning we see that Satan has already become an adversary against God, and that a lot of stuff happens to Job that's really not fair. But what's interesting about Job 38 is after a lot of discourse back and forth between Job and his friends as to why things went so badly for Job, if you know the book of Job, God allowed calamity to come into his life. He allowed Satan to bring calamity into his life because of the challenge that he only loved God. Job only loved God because of how good God had been treating him. And so, that the book of Job kind of aside, what's interesting about Job 38 is after Job is asked why so often, without an answer, his friends were around trying to give him answers, and they weren't being very helpful. But in Job 38, there's an interesting verse here that talks about creation, the creation of the earth, right? And it starts off by saying this. It says, "Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said." So now God is, after 35 chapters of kind of banter between Job and his friends, God is going to speak into the situation. And here's what it says. The Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind, and he said, "Who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now prepare yourself. Like a man, I will question you, and you shall answer me." So I don't know, that if I heard that, I'd be kind of scared, because now God is going to ask some questions to Job. Now, what's interesting are the questions that he asks him, because these questions all have to do with the creation of the physical realm, everything to do with the creation of earth and everything physical that goes into what we know as the physical universe, right? Look at this question that he asks Job. He says, "Job, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding," right? It's a rhetorical question. He's like, "Oh, were you around when I was like measuring existence, when I was creating physical matter and laws?" Obviously not, right? He goes on, asks a similar one. Who was it that determined its measurements? Like, were you around for that? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? Obviously, God is making a point, right? That Job was not around, that he had no role in creating anything, because God is sovereign and he is God, and he decided how things were going to be created. He asked him a third question: "To what were its foundations fastened, or who laid the cornerstone?" Just another version of the same question. Basically, I decided all of this, Job. You don't even know what it is that you're asking here, that you're talking about. But what's interesting is that within the context of this creation discussion that God is having with Job, the next verse comes up. And here is the only verse where, in this whole dialogue, where God mentions somebody else besides himself that was present during the context of the creation of the earthly realm. Because look what it says, reading this part again: "To what were its foundations fastened, and who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy." Now, this is kind of an interesting verse, right? And it could just be hyperbole, right? Just kind of God speaking in general about things being created and existence happening, right? The physical existence. But he mentions other sentient beings, right? People, it's almost like someone who was around to witness all this stuff that he had just been talking about, right? The foundations being fastened, the lines being drawn. And not only did they witness it, if someone was there and they witnessed it, it says all the sons of God shouted for joy. Now, here's the question that comes to my mind, right? Was there anyone around? And if it was, who was it that shouted for joy during the creation process? Who who would be these sons of God that are being talked about? Because it couldn't have been people, right? Because you can't have people without a physical existence to put the people into. So who shouted for joy? Well, if we look go back to our sequence that we've been building, we know that God exists eternally as a Trinity. Then he creates the heavens, and we've got some of these other pieces, right? We have God creating the earth, he creating angels, and the rebellion. Well, think about it. If someone was there and they witnessed it probably had to be the angels. So that had to probably go first, right? So you have him creating the angels who witnessed the earth, and then you have the rebellion. So I think that that's actually a proper understanding of the order. And I think that Job 38 gives us a clue that God created the angels and they witnessed him literally create the physical existence out of nothing. And imagine what that would have been like. Imagine what they would have seen. They would have seen physical existence just boom, created out of nothing. So with this question, who shouted for joy during the creation process? I think the obvious answer is that it was the angels, right? And I mean the heavenly hosts of angels who witnessed God create time, space, matter, and energy out of nothing, which would have, if I would have seen that, I would have shouted for joy too. So I think that helps us understand a little bit about the order and the timeline. But there's another question that's relevant, right? Because who was among those who were watching? Well, you're probably thinking it already, right? Lucifer, right? We know him later as Satan, but Lucifer is a name of a very significant angel. And if he was there and he did see this, right, we know that Lucifer eventually becomes Satan, and that means adversary of God. So in the next unit, in Unit 5, we're going to dive into a little bit more about Lucifer and really try and answer the question, how did he become Satan?